We're going to apply a form to this nail. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of modification that you can do to make this form fit better to the fingernail and get a nice narrow tapered nail created. I'm going to remove the form from the backing and hold on to the oval just in case I need this to close any gaps anywhere. So I like to do a pre-measurement. So I open my tabs, start my C-curve, and then I'm going to tuck this under the nail and pinch it into a good C-curve. I'm going to make a little mark on the form where I want to cut to have room for the form to fit around the finger better. So I'm just indenting this with my fingernails. If you don't have fingernails to make that mark with, you could always come in with your cuticle pusher and just kind of give yourself a little mark on the form where you want to make that cut. So I'm just going to apply the oval to the back of the form. I want to keep the sticky side out always so that when I pinch my C-curve, my form will stick to itself. If you flip that oval over, your form's no longer sticky there and your form won't hold the shape that you create with it. So I'm going to come in with our precision scissors, and right where I've made those marks on the form, I'm just going to make little 45-degree angle cuts that point away from where I'm going to apply my product on the form. It's okay that they're at different heights right here because I want to make sure that my form is going to be applied straight in line with her finger. So when I apply it, if I follow her fingernail, I'm going to end up with a form that goes off to the side. It's going to point more toward her middle nail. But I want to straighten this up, so I'm going to apply it just slightly off center from her fingernail, but keep it centered with her finger. So now I'll pinch this closed, align those lower tabs, and pinch this nice and tight to give us a good C-curve, and then I'll secure these sides. And now you see these little cuts that I made allow that form to stay tight up under the corners of her nail and allow it to fit around the skin but still hold on tight so it stays in proper position. So I'm going to take one of our LE Pro forms and just do a little pre-measurement. So I keep the oval aside because I may need to use that to close any gaps or provide any reinforcement. So to do pre-measurements, I'm going to bend my tabs up so they don't stick to each other as I start to pinch my C-curve. So I'll roll the form to a bit of a C-curve. And then I'm just going to come up to the nail. Now there's a couple of different ways you can handle a nail that's wider than the opening of your form. If we tried to go up to this nail with the end of the form, you can kind of see it doesn't really fit. It needs to be widened either by cutting here, or we can lower where we place our form and close that gap. So now I don't have to do a whole bunch of cutting to try to customize for the wider space between the form. I can just come in and use my oval to close that gap. So we're going to apply this form so that we are straight in line with the finger here. So I'm just going to show you really quickly. If you have a hard time seeing that straight line, you can always take a straight edge like your file and hold it to that second knuckle and then look at that line from the nail plate through the form. And you want that to be straight in line. If we followed that the direction of the natural nail here and applied the form the way the natural nail is growing, we wouldn't have that straight line at all. So we'd be way off center, and you could see that the nail would point off toward the middle nail instead of pointing straight ahead. So something important when you're pre-measuring your forms to know where your form needs to be placed. So I'm going to place this here. And you can see we have a large gap there. And this is where my little oval is going to come in really handy. So I'm just going to set my form aside for a second. And I'm going to pull up that oval that I was holding on to. And now I can just make a little cut in my oval center from the form. And I don't really need that extra piece, so I'm just going to stick it to the back. And I'm going to place this to close that gap. So what this will allow me to do is get that form fitting properly without having that gap between the nail and that in the middle of the form. Now I'm going to make little indentations at the deepest points of the smile line. And you can either do that like I just did with using your nail, or you could come in with your cuticle pusher and just make those little marks on your form. And what this is going to allow us to do is make cuts in the form so that we can get a better fit and create a tighter C-curve. So I'm just going to come in with my precision scissors and I'm just going to make little cuts right where I made those little indentations. And they may be slightly off from one side to the other, especially when you're making adjustments to the form to make sure that you're applying it straight. And that's perfectly fine. So I like to pull these tabs back. And now I'm going to just lightly touch my lower tabs of my form so that I have something to hold on to. And this will prevent it from sticking to me and from me pulling it out of place when I remove my fingers. So I open this up and make sure it's nice and wide. I could come right in here and slide this into place. And then using my cuticle pusher, if I need to, I can make sure I get my corners tucked under the nail. And now I'll start to pinch this closed. Because I aligned my lower tabs before I applied it, it's going to help me keep that line straight. It's going to help me keep that C-curve balanced. So now I'm just securing the form. But now by making these cuts here, it allows for the form to fit the fingernail tighter. So when I apply my product, I'm actually going to build up to that natural free edge so that I'm not going to have an extension that's created wider than my nail plate. I'm able to create a nice sleek extension, keeping it really thin, and this C-curve is going to give it a lot of strength. So this is one way to modify your form to make sure you get a proper fit to the nail plate. Okay, so we're going to do an adjustment on the form for this nail because this fingernail has a higher hyponychium. And if we try to apply the form without making any cuts for that, to allow for that extra skin, we'll have gaps along the side of the form here. So we need to make a cut to deepen that hyponychium area on the inside of the form. I'm going to take my precision scissors. The curved blade here is perfect for making this little cut nice and smooth and keeping that round. So now making that deeper hyponychium cut, we will be able to get this form to fit along those sidewalls so there's no gaps there. But we will go in and make our little relief cuts as well. So mark that and take our precision scissors with a straight blade and just cut away from where we're going to apply our product. And I am going to cut a little excess out to make little cat ear cuts here, because this will keep that form from getting in my way on the nail. So when I'm applying forms to myself especially, but this is a useful tip even when you're applying forms to other people, I go ahead and close them just at the very tip. So I'm spinning this around, I'm lining up those lower tabs just on the very tip of the form. Not quite lined up. And this is the nice thing about lining them up ahead, is you can make adjustments. Sometimes it's a little tricky to line them up when they're on the finger. And if we don't pinch them closed with the tabs aligned, what you end up with is an off-balance C-curve, which I kind of have a little bit going on right here. So this one is a little misaligned right there. So it's got my C-curve kind of pinched a little strange. So I want to go ahead and remove these tabs from one another. And I want to make sure they're lined up evenly. And this is really hard to do when you're putting forms on yourself. So it's best to just do this in advance of applying the forms to your own fingernail. Okay, so now we have the lower tabs aligned, and you can see my C-curve is much more even from side to side. So now I can use this as a little holder to grab a hold of my form and place it on my nail. You may want to push your side tabs out so that you can get it positioned correctly without it touching the finger. And then I'm just going to make sure that I have no gaps. And now we're going to talk a little bit about positions. So if I were to be doing a square, squoval shaped nail right now, I want to tip my form up just slightly. So I'm just going to rotate this so you can see the tip of my form comes up a little bit higher than my free edge because my nail has a natural curve. So the tip of the form comes up a little higher. It's kind of aligned with my apex. So what this allows me to do is build my structure in here and keep the free edge of my nail nice and thin so it looks very natural. I'm just going to use a little finish file here just to show that this also, it allows me to keep my lower arch straight. So if I were making a square Scoville nail, I can keep a nice straight lower arch, have product built in, have my structure built into the nail back in here, and keep the free edge, the product that comes out to the free edge, much thinner so that I don't have a really thick, heavy, bulky nail. So just tipping it up just slightly will help to build your structure into your nail and keep it really natural looking. Now, if I were going to create a more tapered shape like an almond nail, I'm just going to unstick my form here. What I want to do there is I want to angle the form down just slightly. So I want to make sure that's pinched up into a good C curve and placed up tight to the bottom of that nail plate so there's no gap between the nail and my form. So it's really important that I pinch that into a nice C curve. And then I'm going to just kind of lightly adhere my tabs here so we can shift in and talk about other shapes. So if I want to make an almond nail, I want the form to point down just slightly. No matter what shape you're creating, you want to make sure that lower arch stays straight. So if we were going to make an active length almond nail, I'm going to tip this form down a little bit further because what that'll allow me to do, I'm just going to pinch this back. It will allow me to keep the lower arch straight and create a shorter nail. So now I have my complete structure built into that nail. I've kept that lower arch straight all the way out to the point where I'm going to place the tip of that free edge. So it's really important that that lower arch stays straight because that's creating our C curve and our structure is built into that C curve and that apex. So just a note, if you're going to create more tapered shapes like coffin, almond, oval, you want to tip that form down just slightly, and that's going to help you create that shape. The longer your nail, the less downward tilt you need. So if you were going to create a longer almond, you're going to just position it a little less angled. So now just a smaller downward tilt, and I can create a longer almond shape with a straight lower arch. So I'm keeping my structure completely intact through the structure of that nail. When creating a stiletto nail, I also want to keep that form angled slightly downward, but what I'm going to do there is make sure that I pinch the very end of my form closed so it will create that really nice sharp point wherever the length of my stiletto is going to come out to. So if I'm going to create it a little bit shorter, I might pinch it a little bit further back, but I still want to make sure, so the further I pinch it back, you'll see that the end of the form comes up slightly. So if I pinch it back further for a shorter stiletto nail, it's really important that I unfasten those tabs and reposition my form to keep that downward angle. So the shorter your nail is, if you're pinching it back closed, you may need to reposition your form to make sure you get that slight downward tilt of the form so that you can create that entire nail, keep the structure intact, and create nice straight lower arches and have the structure built into your nail.